The sun hung low over the quiet valley, casting long shadows across the fields. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, a steady breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. In the heart of it all stood a small farmhouse, warm but loved, where a young girl named Emma lived. The silence of the world seemed to wrap around her, cocooning her in a softness that only she could feel. Though Emma was blind, she had learned to see the world through the sounds it made. The soughing of the wind, the chirp of birds in the distance, the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. Her days were spent in quiet routine, guided by touch and sound. Each morning, her father would lead her down the path to the barn, his callous hand gently holding hers, steady as the earth beneath them. There, in the stable, Emma's heart found its rhythm. It was there, among the hay and the smell of leather, that she felt most at home, for it was there that she could sense him, the horse. He was a creature that had been brought to the farm not long ago, a wild spirit tamed only by time and trust. Emma had heard of the horse before she met him. Her father spoke of his strength, his speed, and the deep sadness in his eyes that seemed to mirror something within her own soul. But it wasn't until that first meeting that Emma truly understood. She had reached out, hesitant but curious, her fingertips brushing against the horse's thick, warm coat. He didn't shy away, as many animals did when approached by someone who could not see. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his breath soft against her hand. In that moment, Emma felt something stir inside her, something ancient and comforting. It was a sound of connection, of trust. She named him Whisper, for the way he moved as quietly as the wind and for the softness he brought into her life. Every day, she would spend time with him, running her hands over his sleek coat, listening to the rhythmic sound of his hooves as he moved in the paddock. There was a calm in him, a steadiness that Emma had never known. And in return, Emma brought him peace, a quiet presence that he could rely on, just as she had come to rely on him. Yet, it wasn't long before Emma noticed a change in him. The horse, once so trusting and calm, seemed restless at times. His steps became erratic, his gaze far off, as though something inside him was pulling him away. Emma couldn't see it, but she could feel it, a shift in the air, a tension that lingered between them. It wasn't something that could be easily understood, but Emma sensed it nonetheless. Whisper was restless, and so was she. There was something waiting for both of them, something they hadn't yet discovered. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of purple and gold, Emma stood beside Whisper, her fingers lightly tracing the outline of his mane. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond that had grown deeper than words. But in that silence, Emma knew that their journey had only just begun. As the days passed, Emma's bond with Whisper deepened, but so did the distance that seemed to grow between them. Her once calm companion began to show signs of restlessness, his gaze distant, his movements twitchy. At first, Emma thought it was nothing, just the seasonal changes, perhaps. But she felt it deep in her bones that something was wrong. The air around them was thick with unspoken questions. Her father noticed it too. He would often glance over at Whisper with furrowed brows, his worry hidden beneath layers of silence. The stable, once a sanctuary of peace, had become a place of tension. Whisper's hooves clipped sharply against the barn floor, as if he were longing to break free of something that held him here. Emma didn't fully understand what was happening, but the unease in the air was undeniable. One evening, as dusk settled and the stars began to claim the sky, Emma stood by the paddock, listening to the sounds of Whisper's hooves echoing through the quiet. Her fingers rested on the wooden fence, her senses keenly attuned to his every movement. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and earth, the evening cool against her skin. But it was the silence between them that troubled her most. Whisper wasn't there beside her, the way he had been before. He had drifted to the far corner of the paddock, his body rigid, his head held low. "Whisper," she called softly, her voice steady but laced with concern. The horse's ears flicked, but he didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the farthest horizon, as though something out there was calling to him, beckoning him away. Emma's heart tightened in her chest. She couldn't see what he saw, couldn't understand what he was feeling, but the bond they shared told her that something was amiss. She took a cautious step forward, her bare feet brushing against the grass. "What's wrong, boy?" she whispered, reaching out toward him. Her fingertips brushed against the soft, cool surface of his coat. His body shuddered slightly, and he took a hesitant step toward her, but there was no warmth in his approach, no comfort. His breath was shallow, erratic. Emma's mind raced. She had never known Whisper to pull away from her. The weight of his unease pressed against her chest, and a sense of helplessness filled her. Was it her fault? Was she not enough to calm him? She stepped closer, her hand resting on his neck. She didn't speak, but she let the quiet presence of her touch speak for her. Her world had always been defined by what she could feel, what she could hear, what she could touch. And now, in this moment, she realized that perhaps that wasn't enough to bring him the peace he so desperately needed. Whisper finally turned his head toward her, his eyes wide and filled with a sorrow she couldn't understand. And in that brief, heart-wrenching moment, Emma knew that whatever had caused this change in him, it wasn't something she could fix with just a touch. Their journey together was about to change in ways neither of them could yet grasp. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Whisper's restlessness hadn't abated. If anything, it had deepened. Emma spent hours by his side, but the familiar peace between them seemed to have evaporated. Her father had noticed a change, too, but he hadn't spoken of it directly. He simply took to keeping a distance, his eyes wary when he thought no one was looking. Emma couldn't blame him. She, too, was afraid of what she could not understand. Her father's growing silence mirrored her own. It wasn't just a horse anymore. It was a whole world that seemed to have shifted, tilting out of balance in ways both of them could feel but not explain. Whisper's strange behavior made it worse, amplifying quiet tension between them. Emma often caught herself wondering what was happening to the horse. What was pulling him away? Was it something she had done, or was it just the way of the world he carried inside? One evening, after her father had gone to bed, Emma slipped out to the barn, unable to sleep. The air outside was thick with the scent of rain, the kind of rain that fell heavy before it fell. Whisper was there, standing near the fence, his body tense and still, his ears flicking nervously at every sound. Emma didn't say anything as she approached. Words had become unnecessary between them. She simply stood beside him, feeling the familiar warmth of his coat beneath her hand. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly, though she knew he couldn't answer. She wasn't even sure what she meant by the question. She had no way of knowing if he missed the wild, or if he longed for something she couldn't offer him. But something inside her, the same intuition that had always guided her, told her that the question was important. It wasn't just about the horse. It was about her, too. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of not belonging, of not fitting into a world she couldn't fully see. And now, standing beside him in the quiet, she understood that she wasn't the only one searching for something that was just out of reach. For a long while, they stood in silence. The rain began to fall softly, the first drops mingling with the earth. Emma felt the cold mist against her skin, the dampness seeping into her clothes, but she didn't move. Whisper's warmth was enough. It always had been. Suddenly, without warning, the horse turned his head and nuzzled her gently, his breath warm against her cheek. Emma's heart swelled in her chest, and in that moment, she realized a truth that had been slowly unfolding. It wasn't just Whisper who needed saving. It was both of them. They were two souls bound by something that neither could fully understand, but both of them needed to heal. The storm had been brewing inside Emma. The storm of doubt and fear began to calm. She didn't know what lay ahead for them, but for the first time in days, she felt that whatever it was, they would face it together. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something shifts. Emma no longer spent every moment beside Whisper, but the horse's presence was still a comfort. Something solid, something real. He had stopped wandering the paddock aimlessly, and though his restlessness hadn't completely faded, there was a new kind of peace between them. Emma knew it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a cure, but it was enough for now. Her father, too, seemed to sense a change, though he didn't speak of it. The weight that had settled between them, between him and Emma, felt a little lighter. He still didn't understand her connection to the horse, but Emma no longer felt the need to explain. Sometimes there was simply no need for words. One morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale gold light across the fields, Emma stood at the edge of the pasture. The world was waking up around her, the birds calling to one another, the soft hum of life that surrounded them. Whisper was grazing quietly, his coat gleaming in the light. Emma reached out, her fingers brushing the rough wooden fence. The air was cool, the earth still damp from the rain that had passed the night before. She could hear her father moving in the barn behind her, the soft clink of metal as he worked. There was a stillness in the morning, a silence that felt safe. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the peace. The faintest rustle, barely noticeable, but Emma's heart stilled. She turned toward Whisper, her senses alert. The horse had stopped grazing, his ears flicking in a way that was unmistakable. Something had caught his attention. Emma moved closer, her steps slow, the familiar ground beneath her feet offering her a steady rhythm. When she reached him, she found that he wasn't alone. Across the field, a figure stood, half hidden by the trees at the far edge of the pasture. Emma's breath caught in her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't make out the details of the figure, but she didn't need to. Whisper's tension was enough to tell her that this was something important, something that would change everything. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Why was he so still, so alert? Was it someone she knew? Her hands instinctively reached for Whisper's mane, seeking the comfort of his familiar warmth. She didn't speak. Words seemed unnecessary now. The figure didn't move, and neither did Whisper. They stood in stillness, waiting for something Emma couldn't quite grasp. The wind shifted, the faintest rustle of leaves sweeping through the trees, and then, as at the moment had reached its peak, the figure disappeared into the trees. Just like that, the world fell back into its quiet rhythm. Emma stood motionless, her fingers tightening around the horse's mane. She didn't know what had just happened, but she felt it. Something was coming, something she wasn't ready for. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Whatever it was, Whisper would be there. And somehow, together, they would face it. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.